The man who refused to fight for you will become the man who can't stop thinking about you. That's not karma, that's psychology. See, silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's a weapon, a tool used to keep you small, uncertain, and waiting. The man who gave you nothing but silence didn't do it because he had nothing to say. He did it because he knew your need for answers would keep you tethered to him. He understood that unanswered questions create emotional dependency. Every time you reached out and met his wall of silence, you didn't just wonder what he was thinking, you started questioning yourself. But here's what changes everything. The moment you stop asking, stop waiting, stop trying to decode his silence, that's when his entire strategy collapses. Because silence only works as control when someone is still listening for the response. The second you turn your attention elsewhere, the power he held over you evaporates. And that's when something unexpected happens. The man who once withheld words suddenly can't stop watching your life unfold without him. He becomes obsessed, not with you, but with the fact that his silence no longer echoes in your world. You see, men who weaponize silence operate from a place of emotional cowardice dressed up as mystery. They make you believe their lack of communication is depth, when really it's just emptiness they don't want you to discover. They train you to accept less by giving you nothing and watching you stay anyway. But the moment you stop translating silence into something meaningful, the illusion shatters. And when you walk away from someone who never gave you words, you take with you the one thing they were counting on, your attention. So in this script, we're exploring that shift, the transformation from being desperate for his voice to becoming so loud in your own life that his silence becomes irrelevant. Because once you stop waiting for a man to speak, you start hearing your own truth, and that truth is deafening. Have you ever been with someone who made you feel like pulling words from them was equivalent to performing surgery? Every conversation felt like an interrogation. Every question you asked was met with one-word answers or complete radio silence. You found yourself overanalyzing every text, every interaction, trying to figure out what he meant by saying nothing at all. Here's what you need to understand. His silence was never about being a man of few words. It was about maintaining control through ambiguity. Men who use silence as their primary language aren't protecting their peace. They're protecting their power. When someone refuses to communicate, they force you into a constant state of uncertainty. You can't argue with silence. You can't get closure from it. You can't even confirm whether the relationship exists or if you're just imagining the whole thing. That uncertainty keeps you engaged, trying harder, giving more, hoping that one day he'll finally open up and reveal the person you believe he's hiding underneath. But here's the brutal truth. There's nothing underneath. The silence isn't protecting depth. It's covering emptiness. These men have learned that by saying nothing, they can make you do all the emotional labor. You fill in the gaps. You create the narrative. You convince yourself that his silence means he's thinking deeply about you, about the relationship, about the future. Meanwhile, he's doing none of that. He's simply realized that silence costs him nothing while gaining him everything. Your attention, your effort, your emotional investment, all without him having to give anything in return. This pattern doesn't happen by accident. It's a calculated form of emotional unavailability that thrives on your empathy. You tell yourself he's been hurt before, that he has walls, that he needs time to feel safe. You make excuses for his silence because you're a person who communicates, who values connection, who believes that love requires conversation. So you project your values onto him, assuming he wants the same things but just doesn't know how to express them yet. That assumption becomes your prison. The cycle continues because you keep showing up to a one-sided conversation. You keep texting first. You keep initiating plans. You keep asking how he's feeling, what he's thinking, where this is going. And every time you do, his silence teaches you that your needs for communication are too much, that you're being needy, that maybe you should just accept him as he is. Slowly, you start to silence yourself. You stop asking questions because you're tired of not getting answers. You stop sharing your feelings because he never reciprocates. You become quiet in a relationship with a quiet man, and that's exactly where he wants you. Manageable, undemanding, present, but not persistent. But something shifts when you finally realize that silence isn't mysterious. It's just another form of rejection. When a man wants you, he speaks. When he values you, he communicates. When he respects you, he doesn't leave you guessing. The silence was never about his inability to express himself. It was about his unwillingness to show up for you. And once you see that clearly, everything changes. The psychology behind silent treatment and emotional withdrawal runs deeper than most people realize. is not just about poor communication skills or introversion. It's a sophisticated manipulation tactic that creates trauma bonding without the person on the receiving end even recognizing what's happening. When someone gives you intermittent silence mixed with occasional engagement, your brain enters a state of anxious attachment. You become addicted to the moments when he does communicate because they're so rare. This behavior is rooted in avoidant attachment patterns and fear of vulnerability. Men who weaponize silence often do so because they've learned that intimacy requires exposure, and exposure feels dangerous. Rather than risk being truly seen, they retreat into silence as a protective mechanism. But what starts as self-protection becomes emotional abuse when it's used to control another person's behavior and emotions. The silent man isn't just protecting himself, he's punishing you for wanting connection. Here's what makes this particularly damaging. Silence creates a void, and human beings are wired to fill voids. When he doesn't explain his feelings, you create explanations for him. When he doesn't tell you what he wants, you guess and adjust your behavior accordingly. When he doesn't define the relationship, you live in a constant state of ambiguity, never quite sure where you stand. This keeps you in a perpetual state of anxiety, always trying to decode his intentions through the absence of information. For the man using silence, this serves multiple purposes. First, it allows him to avoid accountability. He never has to explicitly state what he wants or doesn't want, so he can never be accused of leading you on or lying. His silence becomes plausible deniability. Second, it keeps you focused on him. The more you're trying to understand his silence, the less you're paying attention to whether he's actually meeting your needs. You become so consumed with getting him to talk that you forget to ask yourself whether what he's offering, even in his rare moments of communication, is enough. Third, and perhaps most importantly, silence creates artificial scarcity. By withholding communication, he makes his words valuable. When he finally does speak, even if it's something mundane, you treat it like gold because you've been starved for it. This dynamic mirrors addiction patterns. The unpredictable reinforcement schedule, where you sometimes get a response and sometimes don't, creates stronger attachment than consistent communication ever would. Your brain lights up with relief and validation every time he breaks his silence, and that neurological response keeps you hooked. But there's a critical flaw in this strategy. It only works as long as you're still waiting for him to speak. The entire manipulation depends on you caring about his silence. It requires you to stay emotionally invested in the hope that one day he'll open up, one day he'll be vulnerable, one day he'll give you the communication you've been craving. The moment you stop caring whether he speaks or not, the psychological hold he has over you dissolves completely. And that's when his obsession begins. Walking away from silence is different from walking away from active mistreatment. When someone hurts you with words or actions, you have something concrete to respond to. But when someone hurts you with absence, with the refusal to engage, with silence, leaving feels like you're giving up on potential. You haven't heard him say he doesn't want you, so maybe he does. He hasn't said it's over, so maybe it isn't. This ambiguity makes walking away feel premature, like you're ending something that was never properly defined. But that's precisely why you must walk away, because a relationship that was never properly defined is not a relationship, it's a situation. And situations that rely on your confusion are not worth your clarity. When you finally decide to stop engaging with his silence, to stop sending the texts that go unanswered, to stop initiating the conversations that lead nowhere, you do something powerful. You remove the audience his silence was performing for. See, his silence was never really about not communicating. It was about communicating a specific message. I don't have to try because you'll stay anyway. Every day you remained present while he remained silent, you confirmed that message. You proved that he could give you nothing and still have access to your energy, your attention, your emotional availability. But the moment you leave, that message loses its recipient. His silence stops being a power move and starts being just silence, empty, meaningless, unwitnessed. This is when the shift happens. For months, maybe years, he operated under the assumption that you would always be there, always trying, always hoping. Your consistency made his inconsistency possible. But when you disappear, when your name stops appearing on his phone, when your presence is no longer a given, something breaks in his psychological framework. Suddenly, the person who never had to work for your attention realizes that attention is gone. The absence of your effort creates a void in his life that he didn't expect. He got so used to your emotional labor, to your attempts at connection, to your willingness to communicate for both of you, that he forgot it was labor. He mistook your care for permanence. He assumed that because you'd stayed through all the silence, you would stay forever. And now that you're gone, he's left with actual silence. Not the weaponized kind he used against you, but real silence. The kind where nobody is trying to reach him because nobody cares to anymore. This terrifies him in ways your presence never did. When you were there, trying to make him talk, he felt powerful. He felt wanted. He felt in control. Your need for communication made him feel valuable without requiring him to be vulnerable. But now that you've stopped needing him to speak, now that you've moved on to conversations with people who actually engage, he feels the loss of that validation. And here's the twist. He doesn't necessarily miss you as a person. He misses the version of himself he got to be when you were still trying. He misses feeling pursued without having to reciprocate. Your absence forces him to confront what his silence really was. Not strength, not mystery, not depth, just cowardice. The refusal to show up emotionally, because showing up requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage he didn't possess. Every time he sees that you've moved on, that you're laughing, thriving, engaging with life in ways that don't include waiting for him, it reminds him that he let something real slip away because he was too afraid to be real himself. That realization doesn't come with peace. It comes with obsession. He starts checking your social media, noticing who you're talking to, wondering what you're doing. He drafts texts he never sends. He thinks about reaching out, but doesn't know what to say after months or years of saying nothing. His silence, which once felt like power, now feels like the wall that keeps him locked out of your life. And he has no one to blame but himself. Detachment from someone who gave you silence requires a different kind of strength than detaching from someone who gave you chaos. With chaos, you have moments to point to, arguments to remember, concrete reasons to justify your departure. But with silence, you have nothing. Just the absence of what should have been there. Just the emptiness where communication, effort, and emotional presence should have existed. Walking away from silence means walking away from potential, from the hope that one day he would finally open up. True detachment begins when you stop interpreting his silence as anything other than what it is, disinterest. Not in you necessarily, but in doing the work that relationships require. You stop making excuses for why he doesn't call, doesn't text, doesn't share his feelings. You stop convincing yourself that he cares but just doesn't know how to show it. You accept that if he wanted to, he would, and since he doesn't, he won't. That acceptance, cold and clear, is the first step toward freedom. But detachment isn't just about accepting his limitations. It's about reclaiming your energy from the mental space he occupied. For so long, you spent hours trying to decode his silence. What did he mean by not responding? Is he mad? Is he busy? Is he testing you? Does his silence mean it's over or that he needs space? Your mind became a detective agency dedicated to solving the mystery of his unavailability. Detachment means closing that agency down. It means deciding that his internal world, the one he refused to share, is no longer your concern. When you detach, you stop performing for an absent audience. You stop crafting the perfect text that might finally get a response. You stop strategizing about when to reach out or what to say that might penetrate his walls. You stop living your life in a way that's designed to provoke a reaction from someone who's proven they won't react. That's when you start living for yourself again. And that shift in energy is palpable, not just to you, but to everyone around you, including him. Detachment creates a specific kind of power because it's rooted in genuine indifference, not performed disinterest. You're not ignoring him to make him jealous. You're not posting things to get his attention. You're not moving on to prove a point. You're simply moving on because staying in place was killing you slowly. That authenticity radiates. People can feel when someone is free versus when someone is pretending to be free. And freedom, real freedom, is magnetic in a way that performance never is. This is what triggers his obsession. As long as you were chasing, he could categorize you as needy, as too much, as someone he could return to whenever convenient. But when you detach completely, when your energy shifts from pursuing him to pursuing your own peace, you become unrecognizable to him. He can't figure out what changed. He can't manipulate what he can't predict. And suddenly, the person who never valued your words when you were speaking won't stop thinking about your silence now that you've stopped. The obsession manifests in strange ways. He'll suddenly remember your birthday after forgetting it for years. He'll like an old photo from months ago. He'll send a vague, "hope you're doing well" text that requires nothing of him but demands an emotional response from you. These aren't gestures of genuine care. They're tests. He's checking to see if your detachment is real, or if he can still pull you back with minimal effort. This is crucial. How you respond or don't respond determines whether you remain free or fall back into the cycle. True detachment means recognizing these tests for what they are and refusing to engage. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. You've built a life without his voice in it, and letting him back in, even conversationally, means rebuilding the tolerance for silence you finally escaped. The most powerful response to his sudden interest is no response at all. Let him experience the same silence he gave you. Let him wonder. Let him sit with the uncertainty. That's not cruelty. That's consequence. Reclaiming your voice after being silenced is one of the most profound acts of self-recovery you'll ever experience. For so long, his silence taught you that your words didn't matter, that your feelings were inconvenient, that your need for communication was excessive. You learned to shrink yourself, to stop asking questions, to stop expressing needs, because every time you did, you were met with nothing. That nothing made you feel like everything you had to say was worthless. But walking away from silence allows you to hear yourself again. At first, it's uncomfortable. You've been so focused on trying to get him to speak that you forgot what your own voice sounds like when it's not pleading, explaining, or justifying. You have to relearn how to communicate from a place of confidence rather than desperation. You have to remember that your thoughts, feelings, and needs are valid, whether or not someone responds to them. Reclaiming your voice means surrounding yourself with people who value communication, people who respond when you text, people who answer when you ask a question, people who share their feelings without making you extract them like pulling teeth. These relationships show you what you've been missing. They remind you that connection isn't supposed to feel like excavation work. When someone cares, they make it known. When someone values you, they don't make you guess. As you rebuild your relationship with your own voice, something beautiful happens. You start expressing yourself not to be heard by him, but to honor your own truth. You write, you speak, you create, you share, not because you need validation, but because you have things to say and they matter regardless of who's listening. This shift from external validation to internal expression is where your power solidifies. You're no longer communicating to bridge a gap with someone else. You're communicating because you exist, and your existence deserves to be witnessed, starting with yourself. This reclamation of voice also means setting new standards. You become unwilling to tolerate silence as communication ever again. When someone shows you they're not a communicator early on, you believe them and move on. You don't make excuses. You don't project depth onto their unavailability. You simply recognize that someone who can't or won't communicate can't meet your needs, and you remove yourself before the cycle begins. That's wisdom earned through pain, and it protects you going forward. Meanwhile, the man who silenced you watches as you find your voice again. He sees you laughing loudly in pictures, expressing opinions confidently, engaging with the world in ways you didn't when you were with him. And it eats at him because he remembers you small, quiet, always waiting for him to speak. Now you're speaking to everyone except him. And that contrast shows him exactly what his silence cost him. Not just your presence, but the vibrant, expressive, fully alive version of you that bloomed the moment you stopped waiting for him to water you. Self-worth over silence means understanding that your value isn't determined by whether someone chooses to acknowledge it. For too long, his silence made you question everything about yourself. If you were more interesting, would he talk more? If you were more patient, would he eventually open up? If you were different somehow, would he give you the communication you needed? These questions plagued you because silence provides no answers, only space for self-doubt to grow. But self-worth is knowing that his silence was about him, not you. It was about his emotional limitations, his fear of intimacy, his unwillingness to be vulnerable. None of that reflects your value. You could be the most fascinating, patient, understanding person in the world, and it wouldn't have changed his behavior because his silence wasn't a response to who you are. It was a reflection of who he isn't. Choosing self-worth means refusing to dim your need for communication to accommodate someone else's emotional unavailability. It means recognizing that wanting to talk to your partner isn't needy. Wanting to understand their thoughts and feelings isn't excessive. Wanting reciprocal, open, honest communication isn't asking for too much. Those are basic relationship requirements, and anyone who makes you feel otherwise is someone who benefits from your lowered standards. Self-worth also means trusting your experience over his excuses. If his silence hurt you, it hurt you. You don't need him to validate that pain by admitting he was wrong. You don't need him to finally communicate to prove you were right to need communication. Your experience is valid on its own. The hurt you felt from being ignored, dismissed, and left in uncertainty is real, regardless of whether he acknowledges it. Trusting yourself means honoring your feelings especially when no one else does. When you operate from self-worth, you stop accepting crumbs of communication and calling them connection. You stop celebrating the bare minimum, like finally getting a text back after 3 days, as if it's a victory. You recognize that consistent, open, engaged communication is the baseline, not the achievement. And anyone who can't meet that baseline doesn't get access to you. This shift in perspective changes everything. You're no longer grateful for scraps of attention from someone who should be fully present. You're no longer willing to convince someone that you're worth talking to. You know your worth, and that knowing makes you unavailable to anyone who doesn't recognize it immediately. That unavailability is what drives him crazy. He's used to your availability, your willingness to accept his silence. Now you're unavailable, and his silence no longer reaches you because you're not listening for it anymore. Moving forward means building a life where silence is no longer something you fear or try to fill with meaning. It means finding peace in your own company, in your own thoughts, in your own voice. It means choosing relationships where communication flows naturally, where you don't have to beg for basic emotional presence, where your words are met with words, not walls. Confidence moving forward comes from knowing you survived his silence and came out speaking louder than ever. You didn't just endure the pain of being ignored. You used it as fuel to rebuild yourself into someone who refuses to be ignored ever again. That transformation isn't about him. It's about you choosing yourself so completely that his absence became the catalyst for your presence in your own life. As you move forward, you'll notice something shift in how people respond to you. Because you're no longer tolerating silence, because you're no longer accepting emotional unavailability, you start attracting people who show up fully, people who communicate, people who express themselves, people who meet your energy with equal energy. This isn't magic, it's standards. When you raise them, when you enforce them, when you walk away from anyone who doesn't meet them, you automatically filter out the people who would waste your time. Moving forward with confidence also means trusting that anyone who made you feel small through their silence doesn't deserve to witness you large. He doesn't get to see the fully expressed, confident, communicative person you've become. That version of you exists for people who value communication, and he proved he's not one of them. So he gets to watch from a distance, wondering what he lost, while you live fully in the presence of people who appreciate what he took for granted. They'll miss you when you're gone, but it's not you they'll miss. It's the power they had over you through their silence. They'll miss the feeling of being chased without having to reciprocate. They'll miss your emotional labor, your attempts to connect, your willingness to fill the void they created. What they won't miss, because they never truly knew, is the real you. The you that emerges when you're with people who actually communicate. His obsession will manifest as regret wrapped in confusion. He won't understand what changed. In his mind, nothing changed on his end. He's the same person he always was, silent, unavailable.